It's the year 326 BCE, and Alexander the Great, king of Macedonia, ruler of Greece, pharaoh of Egypt, and the man who shattered the mighty Persian Empire stands at the very edge of the known world. He's only 33, undefeated in every battle he has ever fought, and after a decade of non-stop conquest, many of his soldiers genuinely believe he's something more than human. For 10 straight years, he has marched through deserts, climbed mountain ranges the Greeks didn't even know existed, and crushed every army that tried to stop him. And now in the lands of India, in the region we know today as Punjab, he stands on the banks of a roaring river called the Hydaspes. But for the first time in 10 years, Alexander looks into the eyes of his veteran soldiers and sees something he has never seen before: real paralyzing fear. Because on the other side of the river waits King Porus, and Porus has something that breaks every rule of warfare the Greeks had ever known. He has monsters. But before we dive into the chaos of this legendary showdown, let me take one quick second. If you enjoy deep dive videos about the most intense, dramatic, and unbelievable moments in history, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me keep making these stories for you. All right, let's get back to the battlefield. Porus had brought with him 200 war elephants. Just imagine that. These are not friendly circus animals. These are massive armored military machines trained for one purpose: to kill. Towering over 3 meters high, weighing several tons. With huge tusks that had been fitted with long iron blades, these creatures were like living tanks. On their backs stood wooden towers, howdahs packed with archers and men armed with long spears. A wall of gray flesh, muscle bone, and pure unstoppable force. And the smell and intense musky scent horses found horrifying. Alexander's elite companion cavalry, the unit that had won him victory after victory, suddenly became useless. The moment his horses caught even the faintest scent of the elephants, they panicked, they reared, screamed, threw their riders, and bolted. And the Macedonian Phalanx, those famous walls of men, armed with 5-meter pikes, what could they do when a multi-ton living mountain came charging at them? The sarissas would snap like twigs. The men behind them would be crushed into the mud. Porus knew exactly what he was doing. He placed his elephants in a long line along the opposite bank of the river, right where Alexander could see them. He wanted Alexander to cross. He wanted him to try. But the Hydaspes was no simple river. It was swollen with monsoon rains, the current vicious and unpredictable. The water deeper than anyone expected. Charging straight across would have been suicide. So Alexander did what made him legendary. He used his brain. For weeks he played a psychological game with Porus. Every day he marched his troops up and down the riverbanks. He gathered boats. He ordered trumpets to blast in the night as if an attack was about to begin. Every time Porus and his soldiers raced to the riverbank, they found nothing. Just another false alarm. Slowly, day after day, the Indians became exhausted. Their guards slipped. They started to believe Alexander was losing his nerve, that he didn't dare cross. And that was exactly what Alexander wanted. Then came the night he had been waiting for. A terrifying storm ripped across the sky, thunder booming so loudly it drowned out any noise from the Macedonian camp. Sheets of rain poured down, turning the river into a black, heaving monster. While the storm raged, Alexander put his real plan into motion. 16 kilometers upstream, far from where Porus expected, hidden by the storm in the curve of the river, he began the crossing. He brought his best men, 6,000 Phalanx infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and most importantly, his skilled light troops and archers. But the crossing was a living nightmare. The river was far deeper and faster than they had predicted. Men in full armor slipped, lost their footing, and disappeared under the water. Boats capsized. Entire groups were swept downstream. At one point, they landed on what they thought was the far bank, only to realize it was an island. They had to wade through another rushing channel, the water rising to their chests, dragging at their weapons. But somehow drenched and exhausted, they made it. When dawn broke and Porus finally realized what had happened, he was stunned. Alexander was behind him, in his flank, and now he had no choice. Porus sent his son with a force of cavalry and 2,000 war chariots to stop Alexander. But this was a fatal mistake. The ground was soaked with water, turned into a muddy trap. The heavy Indian chariots sank and got stuck. Alexander's cavalry, fast and skilled, tore through them. Porus's son was killed in the fighting, and his units were obliterated. With no other option, Porus had to turn his entire army around away from the riverbank and form a new line facing Alexander on a wide, muddy plain. And there, once again, the elephants took center stage, an enormous, terrifying wall of gray death. Then the battle began. Alexander launched his cavalry at the Indian flanks while his phalanx marched straight toward the center. But the Indian line didn't collapse. Porus gave the command, release the elephants. And what happened next was something the Macedonians had never faced before. The earth shook. Men screamed. The elephants roared and charged straight into the phalanx. They swung their tusks, stabbing and tossing men like rag dolls. They wrapped their trunks around soldiers, lifted them screaming into the air, and slammed them into the ground. They trampled entire ranks beneath their feet. For the first time in all of Alexander's campaigns, his legendary phalanx fell back. Chaos exploded across the battlefield. Soldiers scattered. The normally disciplined Macedonian formation shattered. Alexander's army had fought humans, archers, cavalry, chariots, even fortified cities, but they had never fought monsters. And that's exactly what these elephants were. But Alexander had one more card to play, something Porus didn't expect: precision. Not brute force, not cavalry, precision. He had brought with him the deadliest archers in the ancient world, the Cretan archers. These men weren't heavily armored, but they carried powerful bows and had the one skill that mattered most: accuracy. Alexander gave a single command: ignore the elephants, kill the Mahouts. The Mahouts were the drivers, the men who sat on the elephants' necks with nothing but their bare legs, using hooks and commands to guide the massive beasts. Without a Mahout, an elephant becomes unpredictable, wild, and terrified. So the Cretans aimed high. Thousands of arrows shot into the sky, only this time every shot was targeted. One Mahout after another was hit, some in the throat, others in the face, others through the legs. The elephants began to panic. Meanwhile, Alexander's light infantry started slipping in close to the elephants. These men, the Agrianians, the fastest troops in Alexander's army, had a horrifying job. They had to wound the elephants in ways that caused chaos. They hurled spears into their flanks. They darted under their stomachs and stabbed upward. They aimed for the eyes and the trunks, the most sensitive parts of an elephant's body. An elephant blinded in one eye turns in circles. An elephant with a wounded trunk loses control. And now something inevitable happened. The elephants broke. Driverless, bleeding, blinded, screeching in agony, they no longer knew who the enemy was. They threw themselves backwards, straight into their own army.
They're retreating.
Porus's greatest weapon turned against him. The elephants stampeded through Indian infantry, crushing their own soldiers. They smashed chariots. They shattered the entire Indian formation. The perfect orderly battle line dissolved into chaos, and the Macedonians seized their chance. Alexander ordered his phalanx to advance one more time. Now they weren't fighting monsters, only terrified men in a broken formation. His cavalry swept around behind the Indians and closed the trap. The battle dissolved into a massacre, and through all this, Porus, towering, wounded, but unbroken, remained on his elephant, fighting to the bitter end. Alexander, amazed by his courage, spared him, and even made him an ally. But victory came at a price. His soldiers had seen what war elephants truly were. They had reached their breaking point. They refused to march deeper into India. The Battle of the Hydaspes had proven Alexander's brilliance, but it also revealed the limits of his empire. After the Battle of the Hydaspes, Alexander's army stood victorious, but the cost of winning had shaken the very core of his men. The elephants had carved nightmares into their minds, memories far worse than any battle they had ever fought. But Alexander, always chasing the horizon, always hungry for the next challenge, still believed there was more world left to conquer. Yet his most loyal veterans had reached their breaking point. The victory over Porus was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a crisis that would push Alexander's empire and his own ambitions to the edge. In the aftermath of the battlefield itself looked like the end of the world. Mud soaked with blood, broken chariots scattered everywhere, and wounded elephants crying in agony. The air was heavy with the smell of sweat, steel, and fear. Even the Macedonians who had survived felt no triumph, only exhaustion. They had fought in dozens of cities, sieges, and plains, but this battlefield was different. It had tested something deeper than muscle and discipline. It had tested the limits of courage. Alexander, however, couldn't stop thinking ahead. He wanted to press deeper into India. Toward the mysterious lands he had heard rumored about, places with even larger armies, stranger beasts, and more treasures. There were stories of giant warriors' kingdoms rich with gold and rivers that sparkled like gemstones. Alexander wanted all of it, but his men didn't. When he gathered his commanders to discuss marching east, they exchanged nervous glances. Some refused to speak. Others tried to hide their anxiety. These were not fresh recruits. These were men who had followed him from Greece to Egypt to Persia, through deserts where men dropped dead from heat and across mountains so cold their armor iced over. They had endured everything without complaint. But now even the bravest of them could not forget the elephants. They had watched friends crushed like insects. They had heard bones snapping under the weight of massive gray legs. They had seen horses scream and collapse in terror. They had faced something unnatural, something beyond human warfare, and they knew if they marched deeper into India, there would be even more elephants. But Alexander wasn't ready to listen, not yet. He believed fear was temporary, but glory was eternal. So he tried to win them over. He gave speeches about destiny, about their unmatched record of victory, about how no army in the world could stand in their way. He reminded them that they had destroyed Persia, the greatest empire of their time. He told them India would fall just the same. And normally, his charisma, his fire, his belief in himself, those things alone could move mountains. But this time the spark didn't catch. His veterans stayed silent. Their faces stayed cold. Meanwhile, King Porus, though defeated, was not destroyed. Alexander, impressed by his bravery, restored him as ruler and even gave him additional lands. This was a rare gesture. Alexander understood leadership, and he knew that men like Porus were too valuable to waste. A strong ally in India could stabilize the region far better than a foreign governor. While Alexander reorganized the territory, he tried again to rally his men. He ordered festivals, athletic competitions, and celebrations to improve morale. But none of it changed the truth: the men were done. Finally, at a place called the Hydaspes River, when Alexander announced they would continue marching east, the army refused. Not a quiet refusal, a firm, unified stand against their king. It was mutiny not driven by anger, but by exhaustion and terror. Alexander was furious. He locked himself in his tent for days, refusing to see anyone. He hoped his silence would pressure his soldiers into begging for forgiveness. It always had before. But this time, no one came. No one apologized. The army had made its decision. They were going home. Eventually, Alexander had no choice. He emerged from his tent and agreed. The army would not advance further, but that didn't mean he would return quietly. If he couldn't find more land to conquer, then he would conquer nature instead. He ordered the construction of a massive fleet along the Hydaspes River. He would explore India by sailing down its rivers, mapping its lands, and punishing any tribe that dared oppose him. It would be a different kind of conquest, not expansion, but domination of the unknown. It took months to prepare the fleet. Thousands of trees were cut, carpenters worked day and night, and soon hundreds of ships lined the riverbanks. When everything was ready, Alexander led his men on a grand river expedition, south, fighting fierce tribes enduring ambushes from jungle warriors, and pushing through territories no Greek had ever seen. All while more elephants stalked the forests around them. They weren't always attacking. Sometimes they just watched from a distance, looming like living shadows among the trees. And for the Macedonians, every glimpse of a tusk or a gray silhouette was enough to send shivers down their spines. The campaign continued for months, harsh and exhausting, until Alexander decided it was time to return west. But returning home didn't mean an easy journey. He split the army, part of it by sea, part of it across the Gedrosian Desert, one of the deadliest wastelands in the ancient world. Why choose such a brutal route? Historians still debate his reasons. Some think he wanted to punish his army for refusing to march east. Others think he wanted to prove that no natural barrier, desert, mountain, or sea could stop him. Whatever the reason, the journey was catastrophic. Thousands died from thirst, heat, starvation, and exhaustion. Men collapsed and were buried under the sand. Horses fell and never got back up. Supplies ran out. People ate whatever they could find, sometimes even their leather belts and boots. Alexander survived, but the army that emerged from the desert was only a shadow of its former self. When he finally reached Persia again, his empire awaited him. But Alexander himself was changed. The invasion of India, especially the battle against Porus, had taken something from him. He seemed older, more reckless, more desperate to seal his legacy before time ran out. The elephants had shown him the limits of fear. The mutiny had shown him the limits of loyalty, and the desert had shown him the limits of human endurance. But instead of slowing down, Alexander sped up. He planned new campaigns, Arabia, Carthage, maybe even Rome. His ambitions were infinite, but his body wasn't. A year after leaving India, Alexander fell ill in Babylon. Fever consumed him. His strength vanished. Surrounded by his generals unable to speak, he died at the age of 32. The man who had never lost a battle was defeated at last, not by an army, but by time. Yet the battle against Porus remained one of the defining moments of his life. It was the first time his men saw him vulnerable, the first time their confidence cracked, and the first time they realized that even gods can bleed. The elephants had changed everything. The legacy of the Battle of the Hydaspes did not end with Alexander's return west. In many ways, the real impact of that clash, the terror of the elephants, the breaking point of his army, and the stubborn courage of King Porus stretched far beyond the muddy plains of Punjab. It changed Alexander's legend, reshaped the psychology of warfare, and influenced generations of rulers who studied that day when the greatest conqueror in the world met a weapon he could not truly master. In the years following Alexander's death, his empire fractured among his generals, the Diadochi, each hungry to seize a piece of the world the king had carved out. They battled for decades, but all of them remembered the lesson of Hydaspes that elephants, when used correctly, were some of the most fearsome military assets on earth. Armies that had once relied solely on cavalry and infantry now raced to build their own elephant corps. Seleucus, one of Alexander's commanders, struck deals with Indian rulers to obtain hundreds of elephants, eventually creating one of the largest elephant armies in the ancient world. Even the mighty Ptolemies of Egypt began capturing African elephants to imitate the terrifying dominance Porus had displayed on the battlefield. But the Macedonian veterans who survived Hydaspes carried memories of the battle in a far more personal way. Many never forgot the thunder of giant feet shaking the ground, the screams of injured men, or the sight of towering creatures rampaging out of control. They passed these stories to their children and grandchildren, transforming the elephants of India into myth-like beasts. To the Greek imagination, these weren't simply war animals. They were living embodiments of chaos, nature's fury weaponized into a wall of unstoppable muscle and rage. And when later Greek writers recorded the story, they often focused less on tactics and more on emotion, the fear, the awe, the sheer overwhelming presence of elephants. For centuries after Alexander, the Battle of Hydaspes became a symbol of what happens when ambition meets its match. Military strategists analyzed how Porus deployed his elephants, how Alexander countered them with precision, and how the entire battle turned on a single idea: removing the Mahouts. Even today, historians study this clash as one of the earliest examples of psychological warfare meeting technological shock value. But Alexander's soldiers didn't think in academic terms. For them, the battle was trauma. Even as they settled back into Persia, they told anyone who would listen that India was a place of impossible beasts. Some exaggerated the size of the elephants, claiming they were as large as houses. Others insisted they had seen elephants pick up men and tear them apart, a detail likely embellished in memory but powerful enough to keep younger soldiers awake at night. These stories spread across Asia and the Mediterranean, shaping how entire civilizations viewed India. Meanwhile, in India, King Porus became a legend in his own right. Though defeated, he was remembered as the man who stood eye to eye with Alexander the Great and refused to kneel. His defiance, his bravery, and his command of the elephants became symbols of Indian resistance against foreign invaders. Even centuries later, Indian poets and historians wrote about Porus as the ideal king, fearless, honorable, and unbroken, even in defeat, and in a twist of fate. Alexander's own admiration for Porus was one of the reasons his legacy survived so strongly. By restoring him to power, Alexander unintentionally ensured Porus would be remembered as one of the few rulers who made the greatest general in the world pause, rethink, and adjust. But the influence of the battle wasn't limited to military history. It also had a massive impact on Alexander's personal myth. Before Hydaspes, Alexander was seen as nearly invincible. Every challenge crumbled before him. Every empire he faced collapsed. Every enemy either died or surrendered. But Hydaspes revealed something different. It showed that the world was bigger than even Alexander's imagination, that nature had forces capable of humbling even the greatest of men. And most importantly, it showed that Alexander could push his army too far. The mutiny at the Hydaspes River marked the first time his men openly refused him, and that moment permanently changed their relationship. They were no longer awestruck followers willing to walk behind a godlike leader. They were human beings pushed to the limits of endurance. They had earned the right to say no, and they finally used it. This shift had emotional consequences for Alexander. Those who knew him said that after the refusal, something inside him cracked. He became more intense, more restless, more willing to take risks. It was as if the denial of further conquest forced him to confront a reality he had never faced, that his power wasn't unlimited, that his destiny had a ceiling, that his name would never stretch to the eastern sea the way he had dreamed, that he was after all mortal. As the expedition wound its way back across Persia, Alexander tried to fill the emptiness with new goals. He rebuilt cities, planned expansions, redesigned administrative systems, and demanded loyalty from his generals. But none of these projects satisfied him the way conquest had. The thrill of marching into new lands, the adrenaline of battle, the feeling of being unstoppable, all of that was gone. And haunted by the memory of Hydaspes, Alexander grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that those around him were conspiring to limit him, to control him, to shrink the world he believed he was destined to rule. Yet even as his spirit darkened, his legend grew. Word of his victory over Porus spread across the ancient world, even though it had come at great cost. The sheer scale of the battle, the exotic nature of the terrain, the terrifying presence of elephants, and the emotional tension between Alexander and his men all combined to make Hydaspes one of the most dramatic confrontations in ancient history. When Greek storytellers recounted the campaign, they embellished everything: the stormy night crossing the heroic death of Porus' son, the elephants rampaging through their own troops, and the final duel of wills between two kings atop mighty beasts. Over time, fact and legend blended together, shaping the battle into something larger than life. And that ultimately is why the Battle of Hydaspes continues to captivate historians, filmmakers, writers, and strategy enthusiasts today. It wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a clash of worlds, the disciplined precision of the Macedonians versus the raw, primeval power of India's war elephants. It was the story of a king who had conquered everything, suddenly realizing the world was even larger and more unpredictable than he thought. It was the moment when destiny hit resistance. In the end, Alexander may have won the battle, but Porus won a different kind of victory. He proved that courage can unnerve even the greatest conqueror. He proved that local knowledge and natural power could match the most advanced army on earth. And he proved that sometimes defeating your enemy in spirit matters just as much as defeating him on the field. For Alexander's soldiers, Hydaspes marked the end of the road, the point where fear, fatigue, and the limits of human endurance finally overtook ambition. For Alexander himself, it marked the beginning of the end, the slow unraveling of a man who had pushed too far, too fast, for too long. And for history, it became a reminder that even legends can be humbled, and that sometimes the greatest battles are not the ones we win, but the ones that change us forever.